Imagine waking up in Detroit, the Motor City, once the symbol of American industrial might, now plunged into economic chaos overnight. Assembly lines halted. Workers sent home. Steel shipments vanished without warning. All because of a political war over steel and sovereignty. This isn't a movie. This is what just happened. It started with a whisper. Freight trains that never arrived. Warehouse managers pacing factory floors, wondering where the next batch of raw materials had gone. Within hours, calls started pouring in from plant to plant, from state officials to federal agencies. Something was very wrong. The heart of America's auto industry had been blindsided, not by a cyber attack, not by a natural disaster, but by a calculated decision from one of its oldest allies, Canada. What followed was a cascade of economic disruption that no one in Washington seemed prepared for. In places like Dearborn, Flint, and Lansing, where generations of families built their livelihoods on the steady hum of assembly lines, silence took over. No forklifts. No sirens. No steam billowing from smokestacks. Workers stood in parking lots, holding pink slips and wondering how their lives changed overnight. And in Ottawa, a quiet resolve. A move years in the making, finally executed with surgical precision. And the reason? Steel. The very backbone of industrial power, the skeleton of every car, bridge, skyscraper, and pipeline. Steel isn't just a commodity, it's a geopolitical weapon now. And Canada just wielded it with shocking impact. This wasn't just trade friction. This was strategic retaliation. A masterstroke of economic defense against U.S. aggression. And it came at the worst possible time for America, when inflation was already biting, when supply chains were already fragile, and when political division made decisive action nearly impossible. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell so you never miss breaking economic stories that actually impact your life. So, how did we get here? Let's break it down. Canada's steel shutdown, the blow no one saw coming. Detroit's automakers were blindsided. For decades, Canada had been a reliable steel partner, the backbone of America's auto industry. But suddenly, shipments were stopped. Not slowed. Not reduced. Stopped. It wasn't a public spectacle. There were no press releases or dramatic headlines at first. Just a quiet but devastating shutdown of nearly all steel exports from Canada to the U.S. Plant managers in Michigan woke up to empty freight yards and cancelled contracts. No explanation. Just silence from Ottawa. Behind the scenes, Canadian officials, led by Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, were done playing nice. Carney reportedly advised Prime Minister Trudeau that Canada could no longer afford to support a steel supply chain being distorted by American protectionism. He pointed out the long-term risk of depending on unstable U.S. trade policies. And that's when the steel door slammed shut, not out of anger, but out of cold, calculated strategy to protect Canadian industries. Trump's Section 232 tariffs, the spark that lit the fire. Former President Donald Trump had revived the controversial Section 232 tariffs, imposing a 50% levy on foreign steel in the name of national security. The move was meant to protect U.S. producers. But it backfired. Instead of buckling, Canada took a bold step. They refused to join the US-EU framework that would have offered some relief to allied nations. Ottawa made it clear they would not be bullied into submission. And they weren't interested in temporary exemptions or last-minute deals. Trump, speaking at a recent rally, said, if Canada wants to profit off American markets, they need to respect American rules. But Canadian officials had already decided, if the US was going to weaponize trade, Canada would weaponize supply. Ottawa also launched a quiet diplomatic offensive, engaging Europe and Asia to diversify their steel trade. It wasn't just a response, it was a complete pivot in Canada's long-term global trade strategy. Detroit's nightmare, layoffs, closures, and supply chain chaos. The impact hit Detroit like a wrecking ball. Within weeks, major automakers announced layoffs and temporary shutdowns. Plants in Dearborn, Flint, and Lansing paused production without any clear timeline for recovery. Ford and GM scrambled to source alternative steel, either from lower-grade domestic supplies or overpriced imports from overseas. The quality dropped. Costs skyrocketed. Assembly schedules went haywire, and supply chains unraveled at every level. Thousands of workers were sent home. Suppliers, from bolt manufacturers to electronic specialists, lost their contracts. The ripple effect was brutal and fast. Entire communities dependent on auto plants were suddenly without income, facing rent defaults, business closures, and food insecurity. And all this unfolded while consumers faced rising prices for vehicles already in short supply, forcing many to delay purchases or turn to used cars, driving even that market into chaos and inflation-fueled bidding wars. Canada's steel renaissance: clean, green, and profitable. While America fumbled, Canada surged ahead. Hamilton, Ontario, Canada's historic steel town, has seen a dramatic resurgence unlike anything in decades. Ottawa launched a $1 billion clean steel modernization program aimed at decarbonizing its industry and slashing emissions by up to 70%. This move wasn't just environmental. It was strategic and forward-looking. By pivoting to clean steel, Canada attracted European and Asian automakers looking to green their supply chains and meet stricter emissions mandates. Massive investment flowed in from global firms. New plants were built with cutting-edge tech. Old ones were retrofitted with electric arc furnaces and hydrogen-based processes. Hamilton is booming, while Detroit bleeds. Job growth is rising. Wages are climbing. Even local colleges are creating new training programs to support the growing demand for skilled workers in green manufacturing. Canada is now being hailed as a global model for sustainable industrial policy, just as the US stumbles. Pipelines, energy, and silent retaliation. But the strategy went deeper than steel. Canada also adjusted its energy policies in ways that quietly boxed out US interests without sparking major headlines. Pipeline approvals slowed, especially those that benefited US refiners and steel pipe manufacturers. Environmental assessments were tightened. Export licenses were rerouted toward strategic partners in Europe and Asia. Canadian energy firms shifted export priorities toward global markets offering cleaner reputations and long-term contracts. LNG shipments that once passed through US terminals now found new routes, bypassing American infrastructure entirely. In the process, US firms lost key contracts. American steelmakers who relied on pipeline projects were suddenly cut out of the loop. Ottawa didn't shout about it. They didn't need to. Their action spoke volumes, and the industry quietly shifted northward, leaving US policymakers scrambling to respond to a retaliation they never officially saw coming. America's shrinking leverage, allies turn away. All of this has led to a sobering reality: the US is losing its economic leverage over traditional allies. Countries once firmly in Washington's corner are hedging their bets. They're striking deals with Europe, China, and even Russia. Why? Because they see the US as unpredictable, reactive, and increasingly self-interested. They no longer trust that Washington will put partnerships first. Tariffs, sanctions, and erratic leadership have pushed allies to seek out stability elsewhere, even if it means aligning with former rivals or pursuing new trade blocs. The steel crisis with Canada is just one piece of a broader puzzle. Nations are quietly recalibrating their alliances, moving toward multipolar trade frameworks that don't rely on Washington's approval or direction. Others are investing in regional partnerships, building new institutions, and rethinking their long-term security strategies. It's not just about trade anymore, it's about trust, credibility, and consistency. And once lost, trust is hard to regain. As America's former allies chart their own course, US global influence continues to erode day by day. Canada's long game: a shift in global influence. Make no mistake, this isn't just about steel. It's about strategy. Canada is playing the long game. Instead of reacting with short-term outrage, they invested in the future. Clean tech. Diversified trade. Regional independence. They understood something critical: global influence comes not from conflict but from consistency. By cutting off steel exports, they didn't just protect their economy. They accelerated the decline of US manufacturing dominance. They built relationships with Europe and Asia, offered reliability, and filled gaps the US left open. And the scary part? It worked. Canada's moves are now being studied by other nations eager to step into the power vacuum. It's a quiet revolution in global trade, and Washington didn't see it coming. So what happens next? If there's one thing history teaches us, it's that retaliatory trade wars almost never end well. What started as a political maneuver is now reshaping supply chains, hurting small workers, and pushing prices higher for everyday Americans. Trump's tariffs were designed to flex power, but Canada's quiet, calculated move delivered a precision strike. The steal was just the beginning, a warning shot in what could become a prolonged economic Cold War. So the next time you see a car with a higher price tag or a layoff notice in the paper, remember this moment and what triggered it. And as always, stay sharp, stay informed, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth updates on the global power plays reshaping our future in real time.